time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
Pastor J, I want to get a tattoo.
You really
respond to me. Respond to me how you would respond to me.
The first question I'll ask is why?
Controversial taboo topics.
We get so consumed by church, we forget that we have to live the life of being a Christian outside of the Sunday
like you say,
services.
we think going to a service makes us a Christian.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. So here we are about to hear the second time Pastor J wanted to take a tattoo.
Would have been late last year and early this year.
Oh gosh.
Hope Unfiltered podcast with Pastor J and Ren.
Our award-winning show is back, and this season promises to be even more exciting than before. What's Up, Doc isn't just a title, it's a call to action for anyone who wants to improve their health and well-being. Join us on this thrilling ride towards better health on WESN Content Capital.
WESN.
I do wonder about the psychology of our politics. As we see, a lot of people are happy that there was a change, but to what extent are the same people who are exuberant of the change, while I'm not saying the government is wicked and evil, and we'll get all into that in just a moment, I will say that governing is hard. And there are a lot of very simple, easy ways to stumble and fall. So you're not going to be perfect, but rose-colored glasses is just one of those quirks of human psychology. And what tends to happen is either you'll never get out of the fog, or you will get out of the fog and then the rebound will be so drastic. Great love turns to great hate. And that is one of the things, because we're not even in month 4. And already, there are situations where I actually do think have practical merit, but how they're being handled potentially is giving ammunition to an opposition so soon. It makes me wonder how unfortunate things might turn a couple of years down the line, depending on if this trend, if this pattern, or if this situation turns into a trend or a pattern, first of all, and then that continues. Now, there's a couple of things I want to get through before we go into some of the heavier topics. Some of the topics I'll be speaking about, we touched on yesterday. I do have one observation to make on the TTRA situation if we have the time. But before we get into that, first of all, there was a report, and I believe I heard either a radio version of the story with some of the widows' statements, or I heard it on a television broadcast. But one of the things to point out in this story, this is with regards to the $500,000 that was awarded to Maureen Maraj from a 2011 crash. And there were complaints about the police failing with regards to how the case was handled. One thing I want to point out, ironically, is not to say, oh, look, an example of police failure, but rather, this is something that happened that originated from 14 years ago. And a lot of the failure would have occurred throughout the years between then and now. And while we can potentially look at it and say, this is a sign of how bad things are in the police service, we have to kind of remember, it's not literally all happening now. So that's one of those weird things where I'm the guy that rushes to judgment, and I have some of my callers calling me out on that. Oh gosh, give them a chance, give them a chance. Here I am saying, or reminding people, there are certain circumstances where you just have to be patient. Not because, with regards to things like the performance of the commissioner, the performance of a government, I don't have that much patience. Poor results leads to bad outcomes for citizens. But in this case, complaining about it isn't actually going to do anything. Because it's not a clear indicator of what is. Meanwhile, I believed my judgment on the commissioner was reasonably based in significant indicators that she herself gave at the time, the former commissioner. And I was comfortable making that quick judgment. And it turned out to be true. And maybe one day I'll have a similar situation where I'm wrong. But that's the whole point of this platform and platforms like this. I throw my opinions out there. The more times I'm wrong than right, well, I'll have to pay for that one way or the other. But this is just one of those quirks that I wanted to remind people, or get them to think. It's easy to go with the low-hanging fruit of condemning, but we don't know how exactly the current procedures are. And hopefully the commissioner will be looking at all of these things, because I don't know if in his previous post, in the capacity of his previous function, if he kept his eye on court matters and police failures in the courts. But this seems to be an ongoing trend. Now, maybe it got worse over time. And in fact, we should be panicking even more. Or maybe there are things in place to try to remedy it. Or maybe it's just lip service. I don't know. A couple other things to get through. Maxi taxi drivers want police patrols on the PBR at night. And actually, I agree with this. I have a theory. If we have a main public transportation system that is limited, and the PBR is limited, it's one bus route. You know, we're not talking about and the highway and the main road. If you have one main public system, particularly at night, then at night you could concentrate police presence to ensure the greatest level of public safety. Because that's where the people are. So to some extent, for those that want to go after pedestrians and passengers and the like, that's where the potential targets would be. It's not going to cover everything, but it just makes sense if you end up with a significant amount of the traveling public at certain hours throughout the night are essentially centrally located. But we have to wait and see, because I think part of it too is that alone is probably not going to do enough overall. It might make the maxi drivers feel safer and give them a greater sense of security and an actual greater security. But with regards to the traveling public, there's still that question of the unregulated PH cars, most of which are not illegal, most of which are not up to anything. But we've already seen, and there's also the passengers that could go after these unregulated taxis and rideshare drivers. So it works both ways. And those situations, whether it is the driver who is looking to do wrong or the potential passengers who are looking to commit a crime, those things will naturally spread out the population. They can happen anywhere. They can happen by a workplace. They can happen in some residential road that's poorly lit, somewhere in the country, somewhere in a suburb. Doesn't matter. And it's hard for the police to literally police all of that. But if we had a more reliable public transportation system, but we like doing things helter-skelter and not actually thinking things through and making concrete systems, well thought out plans for well-reasoned intentions in order to limit the negatives. No, we only think about the negatives of actually doing things properly because we like it so. Now, of course, today the Prime Minister of India, who, make no mistake, it's a big deal that the Prime Minister of India is coming here. One of the largest countries, I think it is the largest population of a country. And of course, strategically, with regards to geopolitics, one of the most important countries. Conflict between India and Pakistan, the situation in the South China Sea, and the various commercial shipping lanes that go through and around Indonesia, and what that means for Southeast Asia, the situation with the Indian Ocean, and what that means for not just South Asia, but the Middle East and Eastern Africa, the situation between India and China, the situation in the global economy with regards to India being a major player, potentially, it might be the next big manufacturing center for the West, depending on how things work out with China. And of course, a significant amount of our population technically originates from India, although arguably, culturally, we're different enough that those of us who are East Indians are not exactly the same, but they're still ties. Now, all that said, Tutor has a very interesting take. Well, maybe interesting is a stretch, but I think it's a relevant take on the situation today. School was dismissed early. It was announced in advance. By 11:30, school is dismissed. The problem that Tutor has is twofold. One, it's exam season. So what exams were scheduled for today and how do you reschedule it and how easy it is to reschedule it? Were consultations hard for that? Given the fact that Tutor is complaining about it, I suspect the answer to that is no. Which means that I suspect, or at least it opens the government up to criticism of, well, at least in this case, did you think it through? And if the answer is no, what else are you not thinking through? See that? Or at least fully thinking through. The other thing that I was myself wondering, President Tutor pointed out, exactly how does closing schools early ease up the traffic? Because then what's going to happen is, in theory, if everybody goes to school, if everybody that was intended to go to school goes to school, then instead of school causing traffic at 2:30, school is going to cause traffic in the middle of the day. Is that better? Now, I do suspect there will be some people that will probably say, don't bother going to school today. You know, depending, if you're not in exams, obviously, if you're in exams and you don't have an exam today, you would have gone in the first place. If you're not in an examination year, maybe parents will say, look, why are we going to go through this stress for? But exactly, yes, exactly how does that, if traffic was that much of a consideration, wouldn't it have just been better to not have school? And maybe just say only, and more importantly, couldn't you have said, well, let's not have school, but those who are in active exams, particularly CAPE and CSEC or whatever it is now, O-levels and A-levels for us old people, whoever's doing their actual end of Form 5, end of Form 6 exams, I mean, we just let them come out But tutor was also pointing out, what about the rest of the school who is also an exam period and maybe this is important teaching time? Or maybe they might have exams right now. Although that might be a little bit easier to reschedule for each individual school. And you might think, oh, well, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is if you allow things like this to pass, psychologically speaking, this is where it starts. Because it's the teachers, as much as we will complain that there are too many teachers, even if it's a minority, that aren't willing to put in any effort and work into their job. The point is, the teachers have to figure it out. That's what this decision says to me. We want to do a thing, so we're going to do a thing. Y'all deal with the consequences, whatever they may be on your end. We don't really care about that. Because if they did, they would have probably done a more thorough job of announcing, and this is how we expect you to deal with it, or this is how we would like it to be treated, or this is how we ourselves will treat with these questions, or advise you on how to treat with it. But I'm not a teacher, I don't know. I'm just basic human observation on my end and the words of the head of tutor on his end. We'll have to wait and see. Now, of course, the whole CPEP situation, now the workers are protesting outside of CPEP headquarters. I will just say to that, I don't know if that makes sense, to be honest. I think you probably needed to protest outside the Red House or outside Whitehall or outside a more central cabinet government institution to this situation. I'll just say that. I mean, to some extent, you protest outside CPEP headquarters. If the press comes, if you have the momentum and you don't let it die down, that might be good enough. But it might be easy for politicians to ignore if you're not actually protesting them. Because I don't think it was the CPEP headquarters administration that made decisions, it was cabinet. So, but it's not like you have the unions coming out and helping organize these things. No, the unions are not. No. I'll give Michael, and I said this, he's the only union leader, at least that I've seen so far, his take is reasonable. But everybody else doesn't seem to have a take at all. It's almost like if somehow, in this case, it's not that government and labor's interests diverge, it's that labor's interest somehow finds itself more aligned with a government position. More often than not, it's aligned in this situation with a government position that put 10,000 people potentially on the breadline. Just saying. It's giving certain politicians like Michaela Pandey ammunition to throw at the government. And this situation, I actually think, is more effective than what the opposition is actually doing, because she kept her head low. She didn't throw a temper tantrum. She didn't say, oh my gosh, how they won, they're not supposed to win, and do all kind of things to bad talk the government just for the sake of bad talking the government off the jump. She waited for a relevant issue, and she's firing shots now on something that arguably is of national importance and is of the interest to the people. Maybe PNM could learn something. More on that in a bit. Because opposition is doing press conferences, fine. I just wish that, again, the press conferences will follow the tone of their leader. I never thought I would reach a point in local politics where I'm literally constantly finding myself wanting to complain. Not that I'm just complaining. I want to point this out because it's, to me, almost ridiculous. And it's the opposite of what is the usual business as usual complaint, which is, oh, you'll just follow the leader like lemmings. Now it's like, oh gosh, I mean, I, of all people, will want you to show some independent thought, to show some individual grit. But I don't know, this might be a little bit too much. Because then are you really an organization, or are y'all a collection of independent contractors? Now, the thing about it is, this CPEP situation warrants the opposition to speak out on it. The problem that they don't realize, and if given enough time, I will also point out how this very same thing actually applies to the government, but I'm speaking about the opposition right now. The problem is they didn't do what Michaela Pandey did. They wanted to be antagonists and oppose from the jump. They wanted to say, even though it was never up to them, somehow they wanted to claim their statements of there is no honeymoon period is relevant enough after that beating that they took. So they wanted to act like if they had the moral high ground, and they wanted to shout from the rooftops, and they wanted to make it appear as though they're speaking from a position of strength, when the fact of the matter is there's a lot of people, I believe, I've only seen anecdotal examples, but I think this is a widespread phenomenon, of people who are not diehard UNC supporters, but there are people who truly believe that the previous government was wrong, that the previous government was doing wrong things, and therefore not only is the PNM at least currently wrong, but the government is right. And by being this blind, overly aggressive, antagonistic opposition from the jump, when you have almost zero political capital to justify these positions, all it does is it cements those people. And these people would be a lot of people from the middle. I'm not speaking about diehard UNC people, but what the opposition is doing is they are cementing a lot of the middle ground voters against them. So now that we have an issue where actual critical dialogue, where we have to go into the details to try to determine what's the truth and what's the best way forward, now that we have something for the opposition to maybe start to sink its teeth into, they have further dug a hole for themselves where the perception deficit that they had as the government has not been repaired, has been worsened, and dare I say, how people perceive the PNM now might be worse than how they were perceived on the day of the election that saw them lose a third of their voters. Then, dare I say, if Kamala decides to call a snap election just for the sport of it, the results might be even worse, despite certain negatives coming out of her administration in the last month. Because I'm not sure, outside of the diehard PNM supporters, who again, is it 220,000 or is it 7,000? I am not sure if there's anybody outside of that in the population that is taking the PNM seriously. Which is a shame, because again, the opposition leader is technically saying all the right things, but maybe this is where, and I pushed back against it, and maybe I was wrong to do so, so maybe this is one of my takes that was wrong. A lot of the callers, or a lot of the public commentary was that she didn't have the grit, she wasn't fiery enough, she wasn't charismatic enough, and ideally, it wasn't necessary. But obviously, I'm speaking about a situation that isn't ideal right now, when I say that the independent contractors are not actually forming a conglomerate of a political entity. And if they're not following the leader, and she doesn't have the personality to make them follow, whereas Kamala Persad-Bissessar does, and there might be negatives, generally speaking, with situations like that, but right now we're seeing the positives on a practical level out of the government, at least with some of the cabinet appointments. And we're seeing the reverse of that in the PNM, which only makes the PNM situation. And I do think subconsciously people are picking up on the parallels, even if they can't consciously or technically, academically identify them directly. It just makes the opposition look weaker and worse in comparison. And a weak opposition means that the government eventually will start to run rampant. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter most likely of when. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll get into a couple stories in the daily review. I have a deep one to get into. This is the independent senator stuff. Yeah. We're gonna stay tuned.
Maybe he landed here totally by coincidence. But if by chance He's admiring your fresh coat of Benjamin Moore soft sky blue. Well, that's a pretty high compliment. Coming from an expert.
Do you need treatment for obesity or any related abdominal procedures? The community hospital now offers minimally invasive laparoscopic surgery done by an American-trained, board-certified surgeon with over 20 years' experience. Give us a call at 235-5479 for more information.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
Where good private health care is affordable.
Feeling drained? Struggling to keep up? It's time to take control of your wellness. On this episode of Wellness Unlocked, we're diving into the key nutrients your body needs for all-day energy and balance. With 100% or more of your daily essential vitamins, plus added chromium to support healthy blood sugar, this is complete wellness in a single soft gel. Join us as we uncover how small changes can make a big impact on your health. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and take the first step toward better health.
Ironically, it all started with the Children's Life Fund. One of those situations that arguably in the press would not have otherwise been perceived as such a critical situation when compared to CPEP and wesn and all of that, and the flooding and the crime and all of that. And of course, the Prime Minister's pension amendment, right? All of those things was getting a heap load of press back and forth between government and opposition in Parliament and outside of Parliament. But the Children's Life Fund went to Parliament and they had committee deliberations. So different aspects of what was being debated in Parliament were being discussed and voted on in the Senate. And I found it interesting that Senate President Wade Mark had to break the tie of the Senate because the independent senators, all of them, sided with the opposition with the amendments of the bill being debated, or the amendments to the amendment bill. Forgive me, I'm not a parliamentarian or a legal scholar, so if I get the jargon, technical jargon wrong, forgive me. The key point is the fact that all the opposition senators, all of the independent senators, sided with the opposition over 3 different votes on this issue. And that then brought up criticisms by the government, but particularly by the UNC, because, and I don't know to what extent the current administration is trying to keep it formally separate. I know that the PNM did, while they had a political internal to the party public relations team and machine, they also had the Ministry of Communications with the Minister of Communications, and that was for government, while the PNM's public relations was for the party. So the UNC in this case now, back when it was in opposition, it was more, well, there was only one public relations situation going on. But now that they're in government, maybe perhaps it's correct to say the UNC's public relations officer called out the independent bench, saying that they were biased. This is Dr. Kirk Mayhew, who, I will say, in my opinion, one of the best public relations operators in the country, But I could see where, of course, he's going to bat for his team. And to some extent, that's fine because he's not Minister of Communications, Dr. Kate Mayhew. He is the UNC's Public Relations Officer. That's his job, even more so than a member of cabinet, to communicate the political things on behalf of the party. So, now, of course, the independent senators, particularly I guess the one with the most tenure, didn't take kindly to this sort of remarks. And this is independent Senator Anthony Vieira, Senior Counsel. And he was essentially pointing to the fact that, look, and this is a quote, "For myself, I saw aspects to the legislation that were potentially challengeable in court, and I sought to strengthen the legislation." Right? Because he said every independent senator who spoke on the Children's Life Fund declared from the outset that they were supportive of the legislation, and the record will show that none of us abstained or voted against it. However, support doesn't mean being blind to flaws in the drafting. Now, then they had the pension bill vote, and this is part of it, that the government was saying, hey, we're going to have this pension bill vote, and the independent senators, well, they're biased. They might vote against us again. To be honest, maybe it would have been better, strategically speaking, to let the vote happen, and then if there's a tie, the president and the Senate could break the tie. That would have given more credence to the argument. The flip side is maybe Dr. Mayhew and the UNC thought, well, if we kind of put this out there up front, it might encourage the independent senators to be more thorough with their decision-making process. Now, in that situation, some independent senators, I believe, voted with the government or abstained. I do think one may have voted no, to thunderous applause by the opposition bench. Or most of them maybe abstained and one voted yes to thunderous applause to the government bench. I can't remember the clip exactly. But the point was, in that vote, the independent senators were not like some unified front that also sided with the opposition. And I don't think anybody voted against the pension amendments. They just abstained, which in the case of the independent senators, that's fine. I view that very differently to the opposition senators abstaining. And I'm pretty sure they abstained because they were told to abstain. I don't expect that they exercise independent judgment, at least fully, in that situation. Let me just put that out there. Now, this has led to some extent, now there's criticism overall from this situation still to Anthony Vieira. I believe he was one of the independent senators that abstained. And this is what I was trying to say yesterday. Right? Now, Senator Vieira is saying, if the government wants support from the independent bench, that's easy. Just give us cognitive, compelling, and persuasive arguments. Somehow, I think that might work better than trying to demean and belittle us, or via veiled threats and attempts at intimidation. Now, there are some analysts that agree with the concerns of the government, some political analysts. Saying that the independent senators flip-flop challenges their credibility, I'm not too sure how much credence I want to give that to, because that just sounds like surface level analysis. In theory, would you rather see the independents? What do you mean by flip-flopping? Because if you're saying, well, they flip-flop between supporting the government and supporting the opposition, why is it that we're going to assume one side is always going to be right and the other side is always going to be wrong? Why do we make that assumption? If the independent bench always sided with one side of Parliament, that would be a potential indicator of bias. Now he's saying, okay, so clarify. He was saying, I'm very troubled about these presidential senators making one decision in committee stage and 7 or 8 minutes later changing it from yes to no or from abstain to no. Well, because at least I think in this case with regards to Children's Life Fund, there was, okay, we voted essentially generally for the amendment bill, but now there were specifics that they were voting on within it, that the independent bench decided, all 9 of them decided, oh, we don't like it how it is. And one of the things about saying that we don't like it how it is doesn't mean that we can't figure out a way to move forward. It just means that right now we want to say pause, let's rethink this. At least generally that's what it's supposed to be. Now the flip side to that is, Senator Vieira has reported to have wanted Parliament to bring contempt charges against Dr. Mayhew. And I think now we're coming to the point where Senator Vieira needs to understand the position that he, for the most part, put himself in. And while I could say maybe Dr. Mayhew shouldn't have called him out in the way he did or the timing that he did, Senator Vieira, for the most part, did the bulk of the work to put himself in this position. This is what I was trying to say yesterday. Because if you look at some of the critical positions or some of the positions he had on critical issues, and we can't necessarily just use any one of them as an example to condemn him for and say, oh, you see, he's biased for the PNM. But if we look at certain big issues, and this is not the most scientific way to do it, this is just all about public perception. I'm not saying this is proof that he is or is not. This is just to show public perception. With regards to things like the merit list and defending then President Paul Weeks and other issues, seemingly Senator Vieira is perceived to side with the government on some of those key big ticket issues. Now, there could be very many justifiable reasons of why he would take a position that would technically be on the side of the government. So, of course, by default, he is supporting the government in that situation. Doesn't mean he's actually a supporter of them. Each issue is supposed to be contemplated on the individual merits of the situation. And I'm not talking about a list 100 long where 95% of the time he was on the side with the PNM. I'm talking about a few anecdotal situations, might be less than 10. That's not very scientific. But for public perception, that might be enough for people to believe you to be biased, to not have objectivity. For people to think that of you. And now when you want to come and say, oh, well, this man accused me of something, and I don't like the accusation, so I want him to be brought before Parliament for contempt charges and have criminal proceedings and all of this. You're defending a little too hard, which is ironically something that the previous government has been accused of doing by some people, myself included. You're defending this situation too hard. Why? To some extent, you have not necessarily framed your positions in a manner to ensure that the public don't perceive you to be biased, so you end up where you end up. I don't agree with some of the positions he made, but he has the right to have them. I'm just saying, anytime an independent senator sides with the government or the opposition, doesn't matter, the PNM or the UNC or anybody else, I think anyone that's supposed to be in an independent position that is separate and apart from a two-party system should put great pains into ensuring that they explain themselves fully on a technical level to experts and in a manner that the layman could well understand to ensure that people are fully aware. And maybe to Senator Vieira's point of view, he thought he did that. But I guess it's safe to say maybe he did not. And sometimes, perhaps the act of trying to ensure that you're explaining yourself fully, that you're trying to explain how you're being objective and reasonable and independent and unbiased and fair, sometimes maybe, just maybe, that exercise might cause you to have to refine your positions. Maybe it might identify holes in your positions. I don't know. But that's how the public, at least some members, perceive him. So then is it unfair for Dr. Mayhew to also have that perception? I don't know. This is one of those things where I'm not necessarily rushing to say, let the courts handle it. But to some extent, depending on how far this goes, maybe they should. Because I myself have questions at times with regards to the independent bench. Because one of the few things we have, and it's not perfect, we have the courts, the judiciary, which has its problems. We have the independent bench, which has avenues of being perceived to be biased. Because let's not forget, the president is appointed by the government, and these independent senators are appointed by the president at her discretion. It's already an uphill battle you're fighting to say, I am truly independent. Why make things harder for yourself? The flip side of that is, it's not as though we have a great culture of politicians understanding how to effectively and professionally communicate their stances. Just look at Parliament and how much bubble, unnecessarily so, is coming out of some of the more recently experienced parliamentarians. I don't include John Jeremy in that, and others of his ilk. I'm talking about the ones that's been there for the last 10 years. One would think they should be experienced enough, but maybe the last 10 years, it was too much of a Wild West, and now we get what we get from the young ones that were brought up the wrong way. Anyway, I'll guess this here, so we'll take the break, since I know he's here, even though they didn't tell me that he's here. Stay tuned, this is Talking about the WSND Connect after the show. Michael Small, we'll be right back after this.
Always, we appreciate you starting your day with us. Let's get into this morning's first conversation.
Is the country's healthcare system more at risk more than ever?
Why it has remained unaddressed for so long.
Political parties get lots of cash, big cash from financiers, and then when they get that now, you can't account for it.
But it's really the specialist nurses who we are in a greater shortfall for.
We can tap into the resources and have them, at least form some mentorship programs.
Highlight our food systems, and which will attract persons from all over the world to come and experience something that actually supports the local economy.
We're lucky that we have a vibrant legal system that allows change to take place, and it's not that matters are just swept under the carpet and discrimination is allowed to be perpetrated.
A lot of people don't know that there were attempts to ban the carnival, suppress the carnival.
There are limitations in all healthcare sectors,
Correct.
not just this country,
Yes.
where the numbers will surpass the amount of doctors
Yes.
and nurses to provide that quality care. We're talking about holding a patient's hand, giving them the support, the emotional support that they need, advice. That gap, you are providing that pivotal gap, so that really makes you stand out from all other NGOs as far as my experience goes.
As I actually go into the homes also of the patients.
This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward on our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for. It's called loss and damage, and we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the correspondent banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region. Man is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions, and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. I mean, and Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada in spite of the obvious difference in size.
We are tackling the hard-hitting topics, some controversial topics, some topics we sweep under the rug. You don't always have to forgive in a relationship for it to move forward.
If it is you are in a situation where you forgive the person, but to the detriment of yourself, what are you really doing?
It is very uncommon for somebody in the younger age group to have dementia.
Atheists don't not believe.
Is that I can't disprove God, but you also can't prove God, so we cannot have a stalemate.
We'll focus on the woman who's being the victim,
right,
or the man is being the victim. We exclude the children.
Folks are trying to study the underlying brain mechanism to figure out how does this particular disorder happen in the brain? How is the brain processing this?
Don't worry about AI, worry about humans working with AI.
Are you willing to learn new skills to stay relevant for the future job market? That's the challenge that people are going to struggle with.
We're back on talking about the WSND content capital, and of course, it's an interesting day. Head of state is visiting us, but also there's one of those campaign promises. The police actually have to deal with the implementation, and here to speak about that, we have finally, our media ambassador from the TTPS, acting SP, Christopher Roon.
Yeah.
Morning.
Good day.
Yeah, better late than never.
Yes, thank you. It's not Friday.
Looking very blue, I guess,
yeah.
which is funny how, usually that's the police color, but not in Trinidad, right? It's not, would you say it's gray and blue or?
Yeah, blue, no blue. We normally tend to bend towards blue. Well, good morning to yourself, your staff, and your guests. I'm sorry, your viewers. Well, one of the things we wanted to bring out and highlight to the members of the public is the process and procedures with applying for a firearm user's license. One of the main issues, and the commissioner wanted to highlight, is don't use avenues to apply for the firearm user's license that might be, one, illegal, right, and two, may not be the correct way, because then you'll be wasting your time and you might even get yourself tied up with some legal issues and whatnot.
Because if, let's just say, you don't know what you're doing and you end up in the wrong avenue, whether intentionally or not.
Yeah.
If that's discovered, which it most likely will, it will impact your capacity to get an FUL moving forward.
Because you don't, it's not something you want to be paying money for out of pocket and whatnot to persons who do not. And there's no fee outside of the legitimate fees for obtaining your firearm user's license. The thing is, in Trinidad, we might have the capacity to investigate and establish that you might be a proper person to own and operate with a FUL, a firearm user's license, but it doesn't mean it's mandated that you get one, if you understand. So then, you're trying to use avenues that this commissioner might be open to, if you understand. He mightn't be able to facilitate everybody in a timely manner as they want, because you're talking about like maybe 100,000 or more applicants rushing in at the same time.
That's the theory.
Yeah.
When the Prime Minister was campaigning on Stand Your Ground, one of the things that came up was the fact that, look, logistically, the whole concept of this being a major political promise that those who want firearms could get it, logistically, no one was certain with regards to how the TTPS could actually just handle the demand.
And one of the nice things about Trinidad, the process and the procedures to get your firearm user's license is one of the, it's top tier. The investigations are top tier in the sense that it's well done, it's best practice, as opposed to other places where It's your right to have a firearm, and they just give you a firearm.
Right.
You understand? So
Yeah.
in Trinidad, you have to go through a number of processes.
To be fair, it's not like we have a whole set of stories where, oh, and legal firearm was used in murder, legal firearm was used in robbery, and legal firearm was misused here, there, and everywhere, and somebody took out their legal firearm in a road rage incident. I actually I can't think of any story that has a legal firearm in it misused off the top of my head. So it potentially, as much as people might say, well, the investigations here is done well, the actual results or the lack of bad results consistently actually suggests that that is true.
Yeah, well, maybe. But nonetheless, the investigations themselves are so well done that it does delay the process
right,
to some
of course.
extent. So,
yeah.
And then you have 100,000 plus applicants wanting the firearm at the same time. And so logistically, it may not think. So maybe the government might itself change the laws. I don't know. That might, but as it stands right now, only the commissioner could grant the firearm user's license.
Potentially, the most straightforward approach would be to, and I guess, I don't know if you could tell us if you got wind of this, is that they're going to expand the number of officers working on this, right, at least temporarily.
Well, they have a big department already working on it. Okay. So they have the firearm branch, the firearms unit that deals with it. They take in the applications, they contact you, they tell you what else you need, what else is necessary to finish the procedure, to have your file stand by until the commissioner is the one to say yes or no, you can get the firearm. And they have investigators in the unit as well that goes around checking on your viability to be a firearm user's holder.
And to be clear, one of the things with a bureaucracy like ours, where a lot of people just generally in the public service, they are bothered by how slow everything is. Now, granted, usually government bureaucracies are slow generally, right? But you could argue we have ease of doing business problems. You know, we have certain ministries, certain offices, certain clerical functions are slow. Some are fast, some have improved over time, right? And we are grateful for that. But what happens is when you have situations like that where, you know, there's a lot of regulation, a lot of red tape,
right.
Not all of it is outright, oh, I'm going to be corrupt so I could steal something. It's literally just, well, I'm going to try and do something, ask for a favor, pass something on the table, just to grease the wheels.
Right.
And in this case, listen, it's one thing to try to do that just to get your application fast-tracked. This is different. This is an FUL. So for people to understand, you might not think, this might be, you know, well, it's not entirely legal, but it's done throughout the country. But for an FUL process, if you get caught doing something like this, there could be serious consequences for it, right?
You can be charged. You can be charged.
Especially since you don't know who is just trying to grease the wheels to just speed it up and who is trying to bypass legitimate investigations.
Exactly.
It will look the same to you all, right?
Yeah, well, we wouldn't know who's greasing the wheel or not. But nonetheless, person should avoid using that method to get their firearms. So I don't think it is even open as an option. Because, as I said, it isn't the norm. Nonetheless, we want persons to practice and understand that there might be persons out there who would take advantage of this situation and want to use their positions.
Because there was a story like that, right? Like you get the scams where someone in the office does the scam, but then there might be someone who's not even tied to the unit.
So you often hear these scams like with HGC. You always hear, you know, people trying to get HGC home and they go through persons working there to get the home, and you know, it turns out to be a big scam and whatnot. So we want to warn persons there's one correct procedure to obtain your firearm user's license, to apply for it. What we are saying is that whether there's a delay or not, it's based on the investigation. There's a great deal of investigations that goes into you applying for a firearm user's license and it being granted, unless legislation is changed. And then it also is at a great expense to the state, if you understand.
Because of how deep it goes with everybody?
Yeah, because you're talking about evaluations and investigations that we need to take people out of the system to place them into this department now to conduct an investigation. And if you have 100,000 investigations to do, that'll take a great deal of manpower.
Well, but it's not just you investigate one thing into the individual's life. There's multiple things.
Multiple things.
Because there's a list here of requirements for application. Of course, you need a valid ID, national ID, passport, or driver's permit. You need a certificate of character issued by the TTPS.
Of good character, of course.
And it won't be, oh, well, I'm coming to you of the firearms unit to apply. You're not giving me I have to go to somebody else because you don't know me. You're just dealing with the application.
Correct. Yeah.
Right? So that's a whole other part of the TTPS that has to deal with that. Then there's a psychiatric evaluation conducted by a certified mental health professional.
Yeah.
So they'll have to look into that. There's a medical certificate from a registered practitioner. It doesn't say with regards to what, but I would assume that you're in general good health.
Your good health, your vision and whatnot. Yeah.
Vision.
Yeah.
Because a blind person trying to shoot a gun is a bad idea.
Right.
Or someone who is legally blind, right? That has blurry vision. Letter of consent from a spouse and or any adults residing at the applicant's home.
That would be,
that's an interesting one. I didn't know that one.
Okay, so let me say you're above 25 years, you're over 25 years old, you still live with your parents. So those adults in the home also have to give permission or to some extent be okay with you having a firearm. As a firearm user's license.
But it even says spouse. It's not even to say,
of course. So
you know, it's basically any adult.
So this is what the investigation also does. We investigate and so we also have your information sent to the Special Victims Department, where they check on domestic violence reports as a countermeasure.
Right. So potentially, if you have any reports that will be a flag.
And that
right?
would hinder you from getting your firearm user's license.
So again, it's not just the guy taking the application. There's someone that has to evaluate you outside of the firearms unit for the certificate. There's the Special Victims Unit that has to check your background. And I guess potentially, depending on if, because you have to get the letter, right?
Yeah.
Depending on how that part of the process goes.
They would say yes or no, they're okay with you having a firearm.
But not just that, to some extent, could there be certain scenarios where the application process might then say, hey, Special Victims Unit, we kind of noticed something here, look into it.
Yeah.
Right? And that will have to be cleared up before the application goes through. So that's three groups of officers already.
And the commissioner will not sign something knowing that, you know, that you're potentially an abuser or whatnot, and that you could use the firearm for further abuse.
Right, and then there's other documentation as it relates to justification will be requested by the investigators upon being interviewed.
You have to prove your address.
Right,
so
of course.
You have to have a form of address. You must be able to secure the firearm, so you might have to have, like in cases where police officers, we have safes and whatnot at home. So you may have to have a safe in your home, otherwise you will have to leave it in the police station, which is not the best. It doesn't make sense.
You have an FUL and a
yeah, so you need to have a safe. It needs to be a secure compound, a home. So you may not, it's not like this is in a rural place, you have a board house, it's unsecured, you know, it could be easily broken into. It's not fenced, that kind of stuff. So they will be looking at all of that.
Because the one time we do hear about legal firearms in the news, it's when they go missing.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the one big thing about legal firearms, and it's...
You can't secure it in your vehicle and leave the vehicle and go somewhere. No, you can't do that.
Yeah, I mean, over Carnival. Yeah. I mean, I don't know why anyone would think it would be a good idea to take a firearm to a Carnival fete, but c'est la vie.
And we've actually had cases where people, and they've been charged for it, where they've gone to Carnival fetes or they're in Juve and whatnot, and the firearm gets loose or lodged and it falls
out and it goes missing. Yeah,
and
losing a firearm is a big deal.
And we spoke about using a firearm under the influence of alcohol already. Yeah, remember, we brought it up in the show already.
So all of these things, of course, as best as possible, because you can't necessarily prove that these things are not going to happen in the application process, so but you're trying to determine as best as possible that the person is responsible.
So, you know, the investigators may visit your home and speak to the neighbors. And one of the things that might come out from the neighborhood is that, you know, you just drink, you abuse alcohol, you abuse your family, and you're very
just violent
and aggressive to your neighbors. And all of these things will be taken into consideration.
Yeah, if they know that you like to speed and you like to quarrel with people on your road and
if that comes
cuss out people publicly.
Yeah, if that comes up. And then you can't have any, you can't have offenses where you've been charged like what do you call it, assault, these kind of offenses against
any like major.
Yeah, of course.
We ain't talking. You got a parking ticket. That's not.
No.
Yeah.
Traffic offenses.
It'll get you demerit points, but you can still get a fuel. Oh yeah. Sorry, just a little bit of irony in the situation. Yes, site visits to the house. I think that's another one of those things, because that would take time, and then depending, potentially, let's just say, the only problem you have is an issue with your setup at home. So there'll be some facilities say, hey, this isn't good enough, you need to improve it. But what that means is you'll have to take the time to improve it, then wait for us to have the time to come back. Whenever that might be, because there are a lot of people.
So as I said, so the process might be delayed because the investigations themselves are very thorough. There's the logistics behind that, the manpower behind it. Because one of the manpower personnel we use are actually the district police officers to conduct some of these inquiries.
Right.
So you have the unit itself, and they are set up to do investigations, and then they may rely on some of the investigations or assistance from the district police officers. Let me say, live in Chaguanas, the sergeant in Chaguanas might be the one to assist with the personnel from the farms unit, and they would go out and assist with looking into the matter and whatnot, and checking your records, checking the diaries, checking the database to see if you have any reports against you and whatnot.
And it also says attend interview when requested. So you might have to face with scrutiny. And I'm sure a lot of people will be like, well, why me? I'm not a criminal. But like I was saying with an earlier point, well, the police can't just know that because you say it. You all have to look into it. And this is not because I'm a so-and-so, or because I'm a this, or because I'm a that, you all are hard on me. It's like, no, this is the process for everybody. Now, maybe the little old lady, right? When I say little lady, I don't mean somebody frail and decrepit, but maybe like the 65-year-old lady in a non-hotspot area might get through a little bit easier than a young man in a hotspot area with a record.
And he doesn't have a secure property.
And he doesn't have a secure property, and it's hard for him to show good character. Right?
Because at the end of the day, it's not your right to have a firearm.
Right.
It's a privilege, and it's up to the commissioner to grant it.
And part of it, and you started talking about this before, but I want to go into some specifics in the release that you sent me. Members of the public are strongly reminded that no third-party broker or intermediary is authorized to process or influence applications for FUL.
Yeah. So
this is like making me think.
There are situations and there are people who may want to create an avenue to create employment for themselves.
Yes.
That, listen, you come to me, so we use me as an example. You come to me and I assist you to follow the form. I assist you to get your certificate, to put all the documents together. Right, and then I promise you'll get the firearm at a certain fee. That cannot happen.
Right.
That is impossible.
Especially since it's not like, because when I saw broker, I'm thinking something like a lawyer or an agent to deal with the process for you. That can't happen here.
No.
You have to go in. You have to be interviewed. You have to be there in your house. Correct. You have to get the certificate. You have to get the letters. I mean, they could, in theory, you could have someone help you with the paperwork, but really and truly,
to some extent,
right? But it can't be
it has to be recommended by some. It has on the documents. So when to get the initial application, you have to go to government printry. They would issue you pay. I think you pay a small fee for the form. And when you get the form, so there's a list of persons that can recommend you as a firearm user's license holder.
Right.
Including a senior police officer. So yes, you may get assistance to follow the form, but there are people, as we say, third-party people who might want to use it as a form to gain money.
Yeah, like a sports agent. I'm an FUL agent, but they can't represent you in the process.
No, they can't.
Nobody could be your substitute in the process. You have to do it.
But the main thing is that they cannot get the firearm on your behalf.
That too.
Yeah.
But also, I think what you said there earlier.
Influence the commissioner to get it too.
Influence it because the temptation would be, go through me and I guarantee the results. And no one can guarantee the results.
X amount of money and then there's no benefited because then the commissioner himself will not grant to third parties, as we said.
And ironically, depending on the situation, in some ways, because the temptation would be, well, there's so many applicants, so you need someone to help you, to sort through the mess. But given that there's so many applicants, it's not like anybody has access to the commission over this, or they're not supposed to. That's what the police are saying, right? They're warning people against that. No one has access. Yes, I know there'll be the cynics who will say otherwise, but let's just go with that, right? So when he has all of these applications in front of him, you paying some guy that really and truly could promise you nothing. Yeah. And it's a complete waste of money, because it's not like if every week he's there with a list telling the commissioner, oh, well, these are my guys, and the commissioner's like, sure, fine. He said, no, that's not going to happen, right? The 99.999% certainty, in my opinion, it's more or less going to be a scam if anybody tells you, I guarantee you the results.
It hasn't happened in the past, and I just suspect it will happen in the future. So
yeah.
So so we're here to warn persons to be careful and just follow the process. And if you all want, you could release it to the members of the public through the media.
Now so it says, doing anything like this could jeopardize the integrity of the application, right? So long term, that might be the thing. Ironically, you might have gotten the FUL if you just waited, but that might be the thing if you do it, to say no gun for you. But is there any other potential consequence? Because I guess depending on how aggressive you are trying to take shortcuts, you could be subject to certain charges depending.
Yeah, exactly, because soliciting and paying a bribe are illegal. So anybody soliciting a bribe from you commits an offense, and anybody who bribes a police officer commits an offense. So.
And of course, to some extent now, these potential brokers, they themselves might run afoul of the law.
Exactly, because if they are office holders, then they could be charged for misbehavior in public office.
But ironically, I suspect some of them might be complete fraudsters. They're not actually, there will be some who are not connected to the TPS. They may claim, right? They may be lawyers, they may be, somebody else,
they may actually claim to be senior police officers, and, you want to be very careful that recently somebody had brought to my attention that they spoke to somebody and they identified themselves as a senior police officer. And the person said they knew me. Right, and I was like, okay, I don't know the guy, and I asked him for the number because I wanted to reach out to him. And in checking the database, the name he gave, there's nobody by that name.
Oh!
There's no police officer by that name.
Right.
So I was like, there's nobody by this name. So this person who identified himself as a senior police officer, who knows me, he spoke the language that convinced them that he was a police officer.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to let people know that these things do happen in the public domain. There are people fraudulently identifying themselves as police officers, and they will be charged. Once caught, they will be charged for any offense.
Because I think you kind of told me the story of when the HDC thing happened, where they will find actual names. In the HDC thing, they got actual names of HDC managers and then pretended to be those people.
Yeah.
So it's not a stretch, if people think they could get away with it. And the thing about it is, well, first of all, I've seen it in private business where, when you're dealing with people, it's like, well, I know the owner. That cliche thing when you go to a restaurant or a hotel, I know the owner. Meanwhile, the owner is like, well, everybody claims they know me. I don't know them. And in your case, you're on TV, so it's like, I need a police officer. Look, there's a guy. I know, he's there. I know him.
Yeah.
I've seen him a few times. I know his name. I know his face. I know him. And then it's
they're
pretty
convincing.
simple.
They can be convincing. I remember coming across a guy once. We arrested him for impersonating a police officer.
This is so crazy to me.
So he got hold of some ID, and he color copied the ID, and he pretended to be a police officer, and he was arrested. Why is pretending to be a police officer?
You see, the thing is...
But he was able to convince people that he knew police officers, and that he was a police officer, and that he was able to even convince police officers that he was a police officer.
What's crazy to me, because it's one thing if you do it in like a big American city or something like that, especially since... you could then go.
Law enforcement.
You could then drive 4 hours away and back. So there's like more real estate to do these things, right? And different jurisdictions. Where one jurisdiction on one small island, like at some point, everybody know everybody. So I am just blown away that people are willing to do it.
And hence the reason it's a bit difficult to even do undercover work. Because
everybody,
everybody knows.
But in a way, could that be why when you get these brokers or these people that claim to be police, one of the reasons why the public would believe them is no one would have the gall to do something like that here, because it seems like it will be so easy to be caught.
Because the person who brought it to my attention could not, because when I looked into it, I said, no, this guy is not a police officer. There's nobody by that name. Because we checked the database. And they were so appalled that somebody would go out of their way to convince them that they were, for no reason, there was no benefit behind it.
So then this also goes back, and I think this goes beyond the FER situation, but with regards to engaging with the police, always get information from official channels, because again, like we said, you could have qualified in all aspects except the fact that, and if you're misled to some degree, that doesn't matter to y'all. It's like, listen, we're warning y'all, don't go down this road, right? Be careful. Try to exercise some judgment. If some guy claiming to be a police officer, but notice he's not in a police station, he's not driving a police car, you never see him with a squad of other officers.
You never saw his ID, you never saw his badge.
And why is he claiming that he could help you when the police has an official communication?
There are no police officers that can help you to get your firearm user's license. And even in the past, if this was the case, then it would have been very easy for everybody to have their firearm user's license. But it's a very stringent process. It's thorough, and it would take, logistically, it would take long. And everybody be rushing to get their application inside. It's going to take a while. You could get your application and you could pass everything, you could get through everything, and it has to sit there until the commissioner decides, well, he's ready to.
Right, and to some extent,
he has to satisfy his mind.
Right. Let's be clear. No one should think that it's a good thing if the commissioner just has a stack of FULs and he just signs and signs and doesn't even read them, right? So that means that then there's that part of the process where to some extent he has to go over each FUL. Now obviously he's not necessarily going to redo the investigation each and every time on his own, but he can't spend 2 seconds just to sign and move on to the next FUL, and that's not going to work either. So I guess the long and short is, if you're going to take nothing else away from this, is have patience and don't try to take shortcuts.
Exactly.
Because it's going to take long, especially since the expected demand is going to be very high.
Don't waste your money and get tied up in illegal activities.
And don't buy an illegal gun in the meantime, because that's also a good way to get yourself. I assume if you get caught on an illegal gun, if you have an FUL, even if you have an FUL, then your FUL could be
because you would not be able to prove that you have good character. Yeah.
All right. Any time that we have left, we should open up the phone lines. We want to hear from you, Divya. You can call in and have your say on this or anything else. If you want to call in with regards to any issues you might have with the FER process. You might have legitimate issues, but again, you need to utilize legitimate channels to address those issues. Quirks could happen, mistakes could be made, etc., etc. You yourself might not necessarily understand party process. You could ask the ASP. If he can't give you an explanation now, we could try and get one to you at some point in time. And of course, you could call in to speak about any other topic that I did or did not speak about. While on that topic, I do have a comment on one of the topics that I was speaking about before the ASP joined me. When the roles were reversed, the Senate, Vieira agreed with the opposition position on more than one bill, but abstained. When questioned why he abstained, he said it was not appropriate for independents to vote with the opposition. That makes no sense to me, to be honest. I could see where, depending on the individual merits of the situation, you could maybe have a justifiable reason. In this case, it's not right for me to vote with the opposition. But to give that as a blanket statement, and I assume that's what the commentator was looking to highlight, and if that's the case, I would agree with the commentator that is a very significant thing to highlight. To say that as a blanket statement, right? It's not appropriate for independents to vote with the opposition. And look, that didn't age very well at all. I mean, yeah, I guess you could say, with regards to the Children Life Fund stuff, he ended up having to vote no with the opposition, with those individual matters that they were voting for in the Senate, right? With the amendment, I think he abstained with the opposition. So, but they didn't age well. An absolutist position on things like this, I think, it's basically a prejudgment that then potentially is a clue to some kind of bias. right, to take an absolute position, to not be open, to actually listen to the merits of each individual circumstance. If the criminal justice system happened like that, there would be a disaster. Let's use an extreme example, right? And then what's the point of debate? If, to some degree, one course of action you're just claiming at one point in time to automatically say no. Is it because it was the UNC in opposition any time? And now that it's the PNM in opposition, something changed? Which is funny. I have an anecdotal story that said that at one point, Senator Vieira was against the PNM. So I'm not necessarily ready to actually accuse him of bias. I am looking to say you need to be better with how you communicate your stances and your positions and your decisions, because that just threw a whole nother monkey wrench in my thought process on this whole matter. And to me, I'm like, I think I agree with some people. I did wonder, why was Senator Vieira called back again? But that's just me. The politics, as much as he's an independent senator, he can't escape the politics of the situation because he's appointed by a president who's appointed by a government. And in this case, the president's appointed by the previous government. So it is what it is. But like I said, you could call in on this or any other situations. In the meantime, there were a couple of things that I was hoping that we could have talked about. And it seems like there are a couple of crimes or opportunities people need to be careful of. One of them is, well, currently rideshare drivers now. It used to be PH taxi drivers, could have been the victims, could have been the perpetrators. Now rideshare drivers are victims.
Yeah, of course, because they're susceptible to the what they call the crimes of opportunity, where people taking advantage of the app itself. They go into the app, they request the service, and then when they come, they rob them.
Because they could lure you anywhere, basically,
exactly,
right? Yeah, pick me up here. And it's like, well, where's here?
And then maybe on the way, and it has had some cases where on the way to the destination, they get robbed and whatnot. And then they stop off to pick up other people and they get robbed.
Yeah, well, in the last story that I saw, it was at the pickup point.
Right.
Extra people just came in and what I find, this is just a sidetrack because it happened with another crime. I can't remember if it was.
But it does happen with like delivery drivers and whatnot.
Right, but it seems to be a thing now where either they robbed the rideshare driver of his money and his phones and his car,
right? Or
there was another guy who got into a taxi and tried to drive off the taxi. And there was another situation, I think it was with an attempted murder or murder. And in all three cases, it ended up with the perpetrators crashing the car not too far away from the scene of the crime. Okay. So I don't know if, like kidnapping at one point in time was trending and a whole set of other crimes at one point in time was trending. Now all of a sudden, carjacking with and then causing vehicular accidents and wrecking the target of your robbery. I don't know how that is involved, but
we recently got a number of vehicles in the TTPS, and we were able to disperse them to the districts, the 10 divisions in Trinidad and Tobago, and we've been having a lot more patrols. So what you see happening is probably the interception by police officers. The mere fact that I remember one time there was a time that we apprehended some guys from northern Trinidad, and they were going down to Princess Town and these areas to commit robberies. And on the way back, I was working in the Central Task Force, and we were able to apprehend them on the way back in the Central Division. And one of the things one of the guys had said when we spoke to him, because we had asked, how come you passed Central? You live in the north, and you left north, they came down to south to commit robberies, because I think they committed some bar robberies. So they was passing and they saw people liming in the bar and they robbed them and whatnot. So crime is opportunity. And he said because of all the blue lights that it had in Central, they passed Central straight. They said it had too many. So, the patrols were effective, and in this case as well, you see it. So what happens to the criminal elements is that now with the surplus of blue lights out there, on patrol, I don't know if you see it or not. I do see it, and the vehicles are lit up like Christmas trees now.
Well, my commute is very limited, so So, you know, ironically, I did see, at least before Stuart Young's protection detail was pulled, I did see a bit more protection details just randomly throughout the day. After the election, I was like, hey, didn't the Prime Minister say that they were going to do away with the extra? Maybe it was his detail. You know, I don't know. I don't know. But I mean, generally speaking, yeah, my commute, I notice police every now and then, but it's not like
No, but there are definitely more patrols now, especially mobile, and you have that element of the blue lights and the police out there, and it causes some.
Yeah, we have a caller on the line from Dabadi. Good morning, caller, you on here?
Hi, Sean. Morning.
Morning.
Morning. Yeah.
Hi, good day. How are you?
Just want to bring my 2 cents with respect to the FUL and whether or not persons, if part of the procedure would be still to be investigated by the SUIC in the area and where the individual live.
Yeah, that does happen still, where the sergeant in charge. So the SUIC,
yeah, the sergeant in charge.
Yeah, so it's not the inspector. The inspector is the inspector in charge. So the SUIC is primarily a sergeant, and they would assist. Yeah, they would assist with the investigation. So there is the firearm section that does the investigation, and they would employ at times the sergeant in the district. So let me say Chaguanas Police Station or Freeport Police Station or Aruka Police Station, because they would offload some of the files on them to assist with the investigation.
Mm-hmm. Right. Why I'm asking that is because the fraudulent behavior could start there.
Of course, and that's why there would be check and balances. So whether or not the sergeant in the station does the investigation, it still has to come back to the firearm section for vetting. And there are background checks.
Is there a time frame by which, because the sergeant could take a change, he could hold back an application?
And that's why we're saying, and that's why we're saying logistically it will be impossible to do all these FUL applications in a timely manner because of the amount. So there's a large quantity. So we have to be realistic too. So it would take very long to do all. If we look at the amount of applications.
I think Dabadi, what the ASP is saying, he's kind of indirectly answering you, because I understand exactly what you just said. The potential for that is there, but more importantly, the potential perception by members of the public for that could be there.
Yeah, so don't pay any sergeant don't pay any police officer to expedite your file. It would take long in any case.
But also don't always think that he's holding it back.
Yeah,
if that makes sense. Be careful not to just assume that and then things
and there is the appeal board. So if you find your file is taking too long, you go to the appeal board and you say, well, look, I haven't gotten a response. Or you go to the commissioner, you write to the commissioner directly, indicating that I applied for my firearm user's license in January, and it is now March or April or May, and I haven't gotten a response. And the firearm section that does the vetting, that does the final particular file, would be able to give you a response. So they are very hands-on and proactive in how they respond to members of the public.
But thank you for that point, Darby. That was a good point. We didn't touch that.
Let me finish my Sean.
Oh, sure. Okay. Well, yes. Go ahead. Yeah, yes.
No, I remember in my days working in finance branch that in admin you had 2 or 3 members working on hundreds of files. Is it the same way that you have 2 or 3 persons working on these hundreds of files?
No. There is now a section that does the vetting, and they have employed retired police officers to assist with that.
All right. And I just want to commend the commissioner with respect to how he's handling it.
Yeah.
And it's not what is said, but it's how it is said. And he was very articulate in letting people know that all expired CFC and the different things needed, you definitely have to resubmit them. So I think that he will be, if he has to take night and make day, he will be able to deal with it.
Yeah.
Sean, thanks again, and you'll have a nice day.
Thank you, caller. Yeah. And I just wanted to reiterate the point that Dabadi made a very good point with the whole because this happens in other bureaucracies, right? And even to some extent, maybe in the private sector as well, when it seems as though someone is kind of delaying your file, because that's where they have the power. They have the power at that point of the process. So they will try to exploit that. So to explain to the audience, because we didn't necessarily explain it at the time, and as the ASP is saying, it could just be that it's taking long. And if you think it's happening, there is a way to get some redress. But don't think, oh, well, I have to pay. Don't think it's like licensing. Let me just say it straight out, right? Let's not start that to become a norm and a habit and normalize that. Don't think it's like that. Because to some degree, one, the stakes are even higher than a driver's license, even though arguably, driving a car is not quite the same responsibility, but could be on the same level, right? And two, look, at the risk of being accused of slanderous statements, at the end of the day, I have yet to hear anybody say that the things that go on to get a driver's license, whatever they may be, I'm not saying what they are, don't still go on. That's point number one. Point number two, what do we hear more of? Reckless use of personal firearms or reckless driving? I rest my case. I wonder why that is so, right? So with that said, I would agree also with the caller from Dabadi. I mentioned this to you when you told me the topic. I think this is a good sign. The police is looking to come up front and say, hey, this is the process. Hey, don't do this. Be wary of that. Don't agree to this. Don't think this is legit. And it's showing a level of maturity and thoroughness in the public communications and the strategy of how to implement things. So it is looking good. And yes, dare I say, I criticize communications a lot with regards to people in high office. That was one, but not the only, situations that I criticize earlier for. This current commissioner seems to be much better equipped, even though I'm not, one could argue, given what we know of his background or what's been reported of his background, public speaking is not necessarily a thing, because it's not like he led a division and led a unit and spoke to the press before. He seems to be more of a low-key guy. So it's kind of impressive to see him, I can handle that.
Yeah, it seems to be very, the word on the ground, we speak, officers would speak their mind around you, and it seems that he's very professional in that regard. It seems that his time at Special Branch has taught him, to be very professional.
Well, it seems because, look, from what we know, he may or may not have had interactions with foreign agencies, and when you're at that level, you have to be professional because it's not just your local whatever, right? You could be an American. When you're at an international level as an American, it's the same thing like with a Trinidadian. You have to be at a higher level of professionalism, right? Even for the Americans coming here, they have to be at a high level of professionalism because they're representing the country abroad. So it works both ways. And maybe he got that good experience.
And feel free as a station to print the document, however you see fit on.
We could probably share it to social media. I should pass that on. Because that would be something good for people to be aware of. It's just one of those things where I've seen, because back to crimes of opportunity, it's not Facebook Marketplace, but I think there was, I didn't read through the whole story because it wasn't necessarily pertinent for me to do a deep dive into it. But someone got a message about an opportunity to buy alcohol at a good rate. So now we ain't even like trying to lie in wait with a trap. Now we actually just going out and hunting, right? This is what the criminals are doing. And it goes back to, if it seems too good to be true.
It is, but there is also we do have information that there's a lot of bootleg stuff coming into Trinidad from the mainland, including alcohol, including wild animals, including wild meat, including local stuff.
The trick is when you are potentially engaging with these kind of smuggling operations, right, that are not regulated, you also run the risk of someone trying to exploit the lack of regulation. So one, you're doing something wrong, you could potentially face legal consequence for it, even if you get what you wanted to get. And two, it could be a scam.
Yeah, exactly. So try to avoid these too good to be true stories. We also seen the Ponzi scheme still being utilized as a means of obtaining money from persons under false pretenses. The Ponzi schemes are illegal now. I believe there is legislation, if I'm not mistaken. speaking to it.
Then there's also those multi-level marketing situations that arguably some people say they're not Ponzi schemes, some people say they are. I would say they are potentially legalish Ponzi schemes, and I would, even if it's not technically illegal, I would not advise people to engage in unless you really know what you're doing.
There has been reports of persons losing a lot of money through these schemes and whatnot. So try to avoid investing your money or purchasing stuff that seemed too good to be true.
If it seems too good to be true, it probably is. We have Sanford on the line. Good morning, caller. You on the air?
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
Yes, be Arun.
Good day.
Sean, let me first say, you had a good program yesterday. I only got to see it last night. I would make one comment on that program yesterday. Firstly, that I would like to see the decision, that pension amendment that was passed. I would like Prime Minister's pension amendment, as they call it. I would like to see that challenged in the courts. For the mere fact that it was not only about the issue of the pension, but it was about one person. And for that reason only, I'm not taking sides, but I would like to see it tested in the courts. If it's really unconstitutional, if it's constitutional or not. It's very interesting, and that's how the country develops from that type of thing. So I would like to see it challenged. The other thing I have to comment on is that the issue of police officers having to, the court does not want police officers coming to court with a firearm. I understand where they're coming, where the Chief Justice is coming from with that. However, if you look at the courts around the country, San Fernando, Port of Spain, Arima, I think there's enough room in those courts for a compromise where once a police officer comes to the courthouse, there can be a section in the courthouse where the officer goes and lodges their firearm, and without having to lodge a firearm in a police station and then walk into the court and then walking back to the station. I don't agree with that. Officer having to go and lodge his firearm in a station nearby and then walk into court and then walking back.
Yeah.
That is impractical, and that puts an officer, because they shoot a man, they kill right in front in the airport in Trinidad. They do so many things the criminal elements are doing now. So I think it is unfair to expect an officer to lodge his firearm in a station and then walk to court and then walk back to get his firearm, especially when these are things that are in the public domain. So I think the compromise should be in each one of those courthouses that they make a section available so the officer can lodge his firearm there when he walks into the courthouse, to the court building, before he actually goes to which one of the courts, and then he walks back inside there and gets his firearm and leaves. Have a good day.
Thank you, Paul.
I've always had an issue with that myself, in the sense that long ago it was possible, it was realistic, it was reasonable to have thought.
When it was set up.
When it was, you could have left your firearm in the station and you walk across to the court, but then there was incidents of, I remember there was the guy that got killed by the Rio Claro court, and he was being escorted by police officers
who had no firearm.
And the precincts at the court wasn't covered well by armed officers, and because it was the court, and they're not allowed with firearms in the court and whatnot. And he was killed, so the prisoner was killed, and I remember the officer who was doing the escort, I was told that he came very close to being shot as well. And we are not allowed to escort prisoners with firearms. So unless it's a mobile escort, like you see them with the vehicles, then you have armed escorts. So there are situations where you have armed escorts and unarmed escorts. But that's with prisoners. But then you have an officer who is fighting crime, because I myself have had to take exhibits to the court, including firearms, including narcotics, and whatnot.
In the course of your daily duties?
Yeah, and then you have to do it unarmed at times. We've had cases in the past where we had an understanding between the security and the police, and there were places that you would be able to lodge your firearm, but I don't know what. It's been a while since I actually went.
Because when the caller said it, now I didn't know what the procedure was, but to me that would be the obvious procedure.
Yeah.
That at the court, you can't go in the courtroom with the gun.
Of course.
At the court, not even outside the building, within the building.
Within the
but
building,
at
you
the
have
front,
a secure location.
Yeah, there's a secure location.
Yeah, with a safe that somebody takes. So I remember there were situations like in High Court and other places where we went. You could lodge your firearm and then attend court. But no, I think it's totally.
But I think, and this could be where, because you brought up the point where the person was killed outside of the court, right outside, right? This is where, nothing is in a vacuum.
No,
so
exactly.
The more you want to say, well, police can have their guns here, but it's part of the criminal justice system and it needs to be secured, the more then that whatever security apparatus you have there, there's more responsibility on them.
There's more need now than ever that these courts themselves are more secure.
Yeah.
In the sense that, especially now where you have criminals targeting criminals. Not just police officers. You have criminals targeting criminals.
More than targeting police officers, they're targeting each other.
They target each other, and they are sure you're coming to court.
Right, because
they know where you are.
That was the airport hit. It was like, well, we know he's going to be at Piarco,
right?
So let's hit him at Piarco.
Right. So when you disarm the police officers who attend in court, who provide security to the precincts at the court, right? So because one of the things as a police officer attending court you have to do, one of your duties is to provide security at the court. And
while you're attending court.
While you're attending
court.
But disarmed. So there are also armed officers. So we try to provide, the court and process branch tries to provide armed officers at the precincts at the court and whatnot. So if we have cases where we have high-profile prisoners and whatnot, we would have other escorts and other armed officers present. You would see that from time to time. But that's not every day. And the potential for it to have persons targeted at the court, because the mere fact that they court, you would want police officers to be armed to defend the unarmed citizens.
At least have some amount of an external armed presence, whether it's police or court officers.
Exactly, and in that case now, if there's some armed security around the court, then the police officers come in the court, can lodge a firearm in the court and attend court.
Yeah, and then when police lodge and that's the other thing. I think the system should say
nothing wrong with lodging a firearm.
If you're visiting court as a police officer to give testimony, you have to go into a courtroom. You have to, to go into the inner workings of the court.
Yeah.
I don't think it's reasonable to say you're expected unarmed to be part of the security. I mean, granted, you will have a duty if there's something happening in front of you, right, to intervene if you have an opportunity.
Yeah.
But to say, oh, well, you're unarmed, there's a gunman, he's 20 feet away from you, you have to rush in.
Right.
That don't make sense. That you shouldn't be part of the plan.
And then we provide security to members of the judicial
judiciary?
The judiciary, who attend court.
So, yes, and then the security that you provide also should be allowed their firearms.
Yeah.
In that case, I would argue, right?
So there's the potential. It may not be the greatest threat right now, but there's the potential for it to become a volatile and violent situation.
I think this just goes to the fact that the procedures are very simple from a simpler time.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it was. Yeah.
And part of it is what I thought was, this don't make no sense. So I'm a police officer. I have to do my job, which means I have my gun on me. And then I have to, go back to my station or go to a station before I could go to court? That's losing time. Why don't I just have a facility to give the gun
It's understandable that you can't be armed in the court. It's understandable.
Yeah.
Because you have prisoners, you have the judicial officer and whatnot. So it's understandable.
And you don't just want, not that police are random people, but to some extent, it's not necessarily regulated, police coming and going on that level. So it makes things more orderly.
Yeah.
That if you're not there to...
No, it's understandable.
Yeah.
People also feel threatened by armed persons, whether they be police or not, they feel threatened. To
Just in the gallery.
Intimidated, So, it's not a problem.
Now, I'll close with one of the last things that Mr. San Fernando said, that he wanted to see the pension amendment challenge in court. I can understand that, and to some extent I agree with him. It would be good to see a challenge. Now, hopefully, some technicality doesn't kind of cause the result to be wonky, right? Now, I could be wrong about what I'm about to say, and once the process is done properly, then it is what it is, right? I can't complain about it. I suspect, though, it will hold up in court, because to strike it down, the problem is, while you could argue that, yes, some amount of targeting was done in this case, and some amount of pleasure is derived from taking something from a political opponent, the problem is, him doing it, what the PNM did set a precedent that no one necessarily thought would be set. Like, who's going to do that? Why would you do that? Well, somebody now did it, and it caused a public uproar, and it sets a precedent that things like this can't stand because there was no law against it moving forward. So the current government put a law in place. I would argue the law might be actually, it should have gone further. Maybe it should have said 2 years, maybe it should have said 3 years. Outside of maybe certain extreme circumstances, like a prime minister 4 years into their term dropping dead in front of you, and then somebody has to, unintentionally, unplanned, take up the reins. Fine, that's different. But striking it down would potentially send enough, because before it was a situation where no law covered it, so it is what it is. Striking it down in courts might send a proactive bad precedent that I suspect would not be good, so the courts will hold up the amendment despite the potential individual targeting of the situation and what it might mean for the individual's rights. I think the legal precedent being set supersedes that. And I'm not a lawyer, so all the technical jargon I just said could be very inaccurate and very wrong, but the general idea of what I'm saying, I believe it to be true. But I have no issue if it's taken to court and let the court sort it out. Unfortunately, that seems to be one of the few redresses we have of these questions, because to say that we could get a debate on it to a reasonable conclusion. Well, with that said, thanks to the callers, thanks to the commentators. Just let me make sure we don't have any more comments. This is Talking Point on WESN. Thank you, of course, ASP Arun. A lot of topics to cover.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really hope that we move forward with the FIAM applications, and it's well done.
Yes, I think everybody should hope that the FULs are well done, because the last thing we want is shortcuts and then it turns us further into the Wild West.
And hopefully logistics would be better dealt with in the future, because I do see a potential for it to be delayed.
I mean, to some extent, I don't know to what extent the police service could actually improve the situation. At some point, just adding more bodies is not going to really make it that much faster.
The only thing I see there is, if you pay a higher fee and pay off-duty officers to come in to do the investigations.
Right, you're not paying a higher fee to get ahead of the line. You're paying a higher fee to pay for off-duty officers to conduct overtime. That, there might be some unknown hidden dangers with that, but that in and of itself might not be a bad idea, except what might happen is so many people might try that avenue that it might, because it's a parallel track, it's not just an advanced track, so many people might try to take it and subscribe to it that it might end up being the same thing, and people might complain.
I'm seeing the potential for it to have other avenues created because...
But to be fair, while the public might complain about it if it doesn't work out, it's not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea.
So hopefully logistics will be dealt with.
Kudos to getting the retired officers to help out with this as well. So folks, just reminding you to stay safe, remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other, have a good day, but also never forget, a lot of reminders, right? Never forget, it's nice to be nice. Even if your FUL is taking, 6, 8, 10, 12 months, don't have a knee-jerk reaction about it, because this is a serious thing. And to some extent, if the police is taking it seriously and being thorough, then we should have some amount of comfort that the FUL process is being done properly, and that's a good sign. That's not necessarily a bad thing. And with that said, We'll see each other tomorrow. Bye-bye.
WESN.
Do you need treatment for obesity or any related abdominal procedures? The community hospital now offers minimally invasive laparoscopic surgery done by an American-trained, board-certified surgeon with over 20 years' experience. Give us a call at 235-5479 for more information.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Feeling drained? Struggling to keep up? It's time to take control of your wellness. On this episode of Wellness Unlocked, we're diving into the key nutrients your body needs for all-day energy and balance. With 100% or more of your daily essential vitamins, plus added chromium to support healthy blood sugar, this is complete wellness in a single soft gel. Join us as we uncover how small changes can make a big impact on your health. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and take the first step toward better health.
Maybe he landed here totally by coincidence. But if by chance he's admiring your fresh coat of Benjamin Moore soft sky blue, well, that's a pretty high compliment. Coming from an expert.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our